come down on one side or the other, that the Pharisees start here or much later here as a result of the incursion of Hellenism. I'm not sure which.
A lot of people say Ezra started it.
That Ezra, the scribe Ezra, and see if that's true, if that's right, we're right back here.
Yeah.
So put your money down and take your pick. I don't know. I've studied it both ways. It may be, sometimes ideas have a beginning point, a genesis, and they get fully developed, and we may be dealing with that here. All right, but now firmly entrenched in our minds as we start this discussion on these Jewish groups, firmly entrenched in our minds is the idea that we're going to have a struggle here, and these several groups are going to result as a result of the struggle between the incursion of Hellenism into the Jews' life.
So that's the same thing we have, the liberalism versus conservatism.
Exactly.
Right?
Right, exactly
We're trying
right.
to conserve the Constitution politically, we're trying to conserve the Bible, and so the liberalism is trying to water it down and change it, and we're fighting against all that junk.
Then you got the other.
Yes. Do we remember?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what happens is that people go to extremes on both sides. And we're going to see that here with the Sakari, the dagger people, and the zealots. So people go to extremes. But how many of us remember the mid-'80s? So we're looking at 85, 86, when Reagan nominated Robert Bork as Supreme Court Justice? Joe Biden was a member of the committee that was going to say yes or no to his confirmation as a Supreme Court Justice. During the course of those hearings, Joe Biden asked Robert Bork this question. He said, "Is the U.S. Constitution a living document or a static document?" And what he meant by that was this: should the Constitution be interpreted for every age, or do we just leave it alone? Is it static? Is it fixed? Or is it a living document where we can just kind of play with it according to the whims of the people? Well, Bork said it was a static document. We're not to mess with it. What do you think Biden thought? Well, a new word entered the lexicon, and the word is borked. We borked him. And Robert H. Bork, was never allowed to be a Supreme Court Justice because the liberals on that committee said, he's old-fashioned. He wants to leave the Constitution alone. Well, these sects, these groups of the Jews come about. You see how timely this is? So the Sadducees went too far in their liberalism, didn't they? They went too far. Did the Pharisees go too far?
Yep.
Yeah, Jesus said they did. They went too far. We'll come back to that. All right. Well, let's get into some really precise things here then. So 2 things I want you to know. That as we talk about Pharisees and Sadducees, number 1, the Pharisees were in charge of the temple. The Sadducees were in charge of the high priesthood. Wow! That's going to set up some troubles. So Pharisees, think of them as being in charge of the temple. And the Sadducees controlled the high priesthood. Well, how'd that happen? Well, we're just getting definitions now. We haven't come to our story, but we'll get there. All right, let's talk about the Pharisees. So let's go to just in your notes, just put the Pharisees. The Pharisees. They got their name early in the reign of John Hyrcanus. Now we'll come back to John Hyrcanus, but the name comes about roughly 140, 150 BC. They were actually given a name. There were about 6,000 of them in the time of Herod the Great. Now, Herod the Great, as you know, is the one who authorized the killing of the babies when Jesus was born. So around the flip there from BC to AD, from before Christ to Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, around that time, there were about 6,000 of these guys. And of these 6 Jewish groups that we'll discuss, these were the most numerous and they were the most influential. Their name means separated ones. And if this theory is correct, the separation was from Hellenism. If this theory is correct, the separation is from the Babylonian influence. and both may be correct. Ezra may have started this, and then they really got their name later on and really became codified. You know how groups are, as they proceed, they become more, get some rules and regulations. And by the way, are the Pharisees still with us? Yes, and they're the only one of these 6 groups that survive.
Yeah, Wednesday night.
What's that?
Wednesday night church services.
Say it again.
Sometimes at the Wednesday night church.
How dare you, sir? How dare you? This is an outrage. Oh my goodness. Have you seen a Pharisee? You've been to New York City, you've seen the Hasidim with their the text in Leviticus, rather obscure text. You're not to round off the corners of your beard. Not Leviticus. I just read Leviticus the other day, and I read Deuteronomy, and it's kind of running through my head, but you can look it up. That one of the rules was the men were not to round off the corners of their beards, and so strict interpretation of the law today, the Hasidim, the separated ones, they grow those, what would you call that? It's like a sideburn, but it's like a finger curl. And then they wear the all black clothes. So yeah, the Pharisees are with us today. Make a note of that. The Pharisees still survive. These other sects, these other groups are gone, but they're still with us. Now, make a note of this too, that they not only kept the written law, but they kept the Mishnah, the oral law too. Uh-oh. We got a problem here. When my Catholic acquaintances say to me, oh, we believe in the Bible, but we also believe in our tradition. Now we got a problem. So the Pharisees kept the Mishnah, the oral law, and the written law. And you've heard this phrase too. So here we are between the testaments. We're setting the scene here. That the Pharisees built a what around the law? A hedge. And the intent was good, to protect the law. But then when you start keeping the hedge too, you got a problem, don't you? When that becomes law, when tradition of what man says becomes the rule, then we've got a problem. And no wonder Jesus interacted with the Pharisees in some pretty specific and stringent ways. All right, they believed in the resurrection of the dead. They believed in the old covenant. And if you'll make a note that they went to the extreme. And I'm going to give you 4 examples of that. Oh, by the way, of course, they believed in angels and spirits, resurrection of the body, immortality of the soul. Now let's talk about Sabbath keeping, and you'll be with these 3 or 4 examples I'm going to give you, you will see an insight into the way the Pharisees' mind began to work. So we've already figured out these are the extreme right-wingers, and listen to some of these things. This is really interesting. For instance, you could not spit on bare ground because that was considered plowing. I am not making this up. That's a lot of spit in it. That's some serious. Now, did all the Pharisees forbid that? No, but some did. If a woman looked in a mirror on the Sabbath, which she was forbidden to do, because they said if she sees a gray hair, she'll be tempted to pluck it out, and that's work. Isn't that crazy? That's what happened to me, folks. I was so excited a few years ago, I thought I was having a growth spurt because my head popped up through my hair. You know, in heaven, I'm going to be 7 feet tall and with full head of hair. It's going to be great. I'm going. You know, I've never bumped my head on anything. Oh my goodness.
When hair grows out, hair grows in, and when hair grows in, hits gray matter, it stays in and turns gray. But if you don't hit anything, it just falls out.
See, look at the time. Look at the time. We're almost. Here's another one. If a chicken laid an egg on a festival day, you weren't supposed to eat it, even though the hen didn't know it was a festival day. That chicken's working, and you eat the product of that work. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Hey,
Now, what happens when we have a list of rules and we're proud that we keep those rules? It's pride, it's a self, see, and this is where Jesus comes along, and just, by the way, there were 4 good Pharisees. We know that. Nicodemus seems to be fair-minded. Gamaliel seems to be fair-minded, and one of Paul's instructors. Joseph of Arimathea, as Saul later Paul, yeah. So there are some good ones, and I wonder how many of them just kind of kept quiet.